Let's start with my favorite part, the eyes. This is done in a 5x7, so the eyes are really small, but you can still get a lot of detail in there if you're just patient enough. So you can see that I keep my pencils really sharp for smaller detailed areas, and then of course leave room for the highlighted spot. But you also want to play around with the different colors because the eyes don't just have one solid block of color. So I use a little bit of a reddish brown color and then use a lighter, more ivory kind of color in there. And what that does is it kind of helps to create that sense of depth in the eye itself and almost an illusion of the how round it is, almost glass-like in a way. And then continuing out from the eyes, you want to play around with colors first, not so much the details, but look at the base colors of the portrait and then work with that first. And you definitely want to draw in the same direction as the fur that you see. That's super, super important. Now at this point, I'm using a variety of different colors. So I'll use some rich dark browns, a little bit of some orange color. And then to play around with the lighter sections, I use a little bit of a raw umber color. That's what I used in the eyes too. That raw umber is just a very light, creamy ivory color, so it creates kind of a natural look, and it works really well for blending in lighter areas, as well as even if you wanted to blend in a darker area, you can use that a little bit and then apply darker color pencils on top. And so what that does is it creates more of a smoother effect overall. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking that drawing realistically is super challenging, but I promise you, once you get in the habit of just learning these techniques and then figuring out what kind of colors to use as well, you'll have more fun with it and not worry so much about getting it correct. What I'm using with that paintbrush is a mineral spirit oil, and what that does is it blends everything together. You can actually see the effect already happening. And then as it's drying or seeping in, I don't think it's actually drying, but you can start to apply more layers on top of that. And it actually creates more of a smoother texture and more vibrant colors as well after you've done that. So now you can see I'm using a lot of that raw umber in the highlighted sections, and it almost has a green look to it, which is actually really important to have in almost all portraits. If you haven't watched any of my videos, I talk about using raw umber colors, whether it be lighter or darker colors, to create a more natural effect in the highlighted areas and the midtones. There's also a lot of warm tones in this portrait, so what I'm doing to counteract that, especially in the darker sections, is to use a cool gray color. So you can use just like a darker cool gray or even a black color in some of the darker spots, which later on I'll use black on top of all this. You don't want to use just straight black starting out because it creates a more flat effect. And the two biggest tips that I can say is don't start drawing in the highlights just yet. Because you want to leave room for those as you start to build up the layers, because it's not like paint. You can't just paint white on top of, or you can't just draw white on top of the colors. It just doesn't work that way with color pencils. And then the other thing is don't just straight up start using black unless you could see that that section is 100% black color. Then you can, but it's very rare that I will do that. So I'll just tell you a little bit of a backstory. So when I started drawing, I actually really had a hard time drawing. I really didn't like it because it was beyond challenging, and I think I put too much pressure on myself to make it perfect, and I didn't know the techniques. I understood how to draw certain ways, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it, but there were so many techniques that I didn't understand that it became so frustrating to draw and actually enjoy the process. But now that I understand how colored pencils are applied, and I also understand color theory when it comes to colored pencils, I get to now enjoy the process a whole lot better. And don't worry about drawing proportionally all too much. You'll kind of learn how to do that as you practice the process itself. But if you are kind of more proportionately blind, just kind of let that not necessarily be a setback for yourself, but just kind of let that go on the sideline and just enjoy the actual drawing process. Because as you're building up these layers and these details, you kind of end up drawing a little bit more proportionately more better at that than you'll realize. You'll be surprised how proportionately well you'll end up drawing the more details and the more layers that you actually build up. So a lot of my students have never really drawn before. And so they'll come and they'll do the class and they're actually quite surprised at how well they did, because I didn't let them focus on drawing proportionally. I let them focus more on, okay, where's the direction of the fur going here? All right, so I know I need to build up layers in this section. Let's work on some of the highlights. Let's work on some of the midtones and just focus more on just having fun building up those layers and then getting the details. And then once you have those details, you'll start to see that, oh, actually, like, I kind of have the proportions down pat. But it does take time to really start to understand those things. The more you practice, the more it becomes second nature. And that's where I've gotten to a point. It took me probably about a year and a half for it to become second nature. But that's pretty realistic, because the whole point of drawing is to enjoy the process, not the outcome. So the one thing that I still focus on the most when I'm drawing is thinking about the highlights, like where are those located, and then thinking about the shapes of every section. So like for this nose here, the nostrils are not the same. They're never going to be the same shape on each side. So just look at the shapes and try to replicate that to the best of your ability, but don't start out getting those details first. Just kind of hold off on that aspect of it. And then as you start to build up layers, then you can add more of those details in, because you can still draw darker tint or shadows, but you can't necessarily continue with the highlights. So just draw lightly, and then as you're building those up, you can draw more of a sharper look with like the deep areas like the eyes or the nose. Those are the most detailed parts, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So getting those really sharp, that's more something that will end up happening after you've built up a lot of layers. So just be mindful of that too. It's all about having patience. And I love listening to just abstract music, something that's calming, relaxing while I'm drawing, or I'll listen to a podcast or something that's going to let your mind kind of wander off and let you be able to do the drawing for a long period of time, because a lot of people don't have the patience to draw for a long time. For me, I don't draw longer than probably 30 minutes to an hour at a time, mostly because my hands will start to cramp up. But I've built up a longer attention span because I've just learned to enjoy the process while also maybe having something in the background to distract myself at the same time. So the whole thing becomes more of a meditative event because I am drawing, I'm enjoying it. I'm not necessarily focused on every single detail of each section. I'm just kind of thinking about shapes and colors and where all of that needs to go, but also not worrying about making it perfect. I used to worry about making it perfect. And honestly, I could take this life advice for myself in many other subjects, but I don't worry about making it look just like the picture. If you start to worry about that, then you're going to end up being really disappointed, and you're not going to make the progress that you want to make because you're too focused on making it perfect. And it's not about being perfect. It's about having fun in the process itself. It's not about the outcome. It's about the journey. So when you're doing this, just be mindful of that. And if you really find yourself enjoying the process, then you're definitely in the right field. This is just a lot of fun to do itself. And if you don't necessarily enjoy it, hey, at least you get to enjoy watching these videos. I have these kind of videos, and then I have a time-lapse video channel, so you can just strictly like watch me draw with nice background music. But if you are interested in learning to draw, you can actually take a class. It's all online and it's at your own pace. So if you go to my website and go to Learn to Draw, there are classes that you can pick out individually that are a couple hours long. Or if you want to go more in depth, I have a whole 8-week program where you can learn to draw pet portraits. It's not just pet portraits, it's also just animals, like different types of fur, different colored fur, different textured fur, different features. But it's super in depth, and I've had a lot of students actually come out of it understanding a lot more of how color pencils work on different textured fur and different colors. And they just really enjoyed the whole class. And it's all at your own pace too, so you don't have to do the 8-week program. I just sectioned it that way so you can pace yourself if you want. I'll also have those linked down below, so if you want just a direct link to it, you can click on that as well and check them out. If you really are interested in doing something like this, I highly suggest the beginner class, which is I have the Bumblebee class, and I had a lot of students really enjoy that one, and they had some really good results. So I highly suggest taking that one. It is just a couple hours long, but you can pause or play at your leisure as well. I think you'll find that you'll end up getting really into it in the moment, and it'll go by really fast. So drawing mouths is pretty complicated, and it's one of my least favorite features to draw because the tongue just looks very painted looking, but that's okay. You know, this is still, once again, it's not about drawing realistically. It's more just about having fun and getting the shading down and the proportions down as best as possible. Moving on to the next section here. So this dog had a little chain and a little bow on it. So I worked really hard to try to draw the details as best as possible with the small amount of space that I had, but it actually turned out really cute. So there's a lot of pink that's involved in here. And I think the biggest key takeaway for drawing collars is to actually make them look more shiny, like add more contrast to it. So you see there's darker sections and lighter sections. Try to make them as contrasty as possible, and that will actually help him look more realistic and more, it'll pop out a lot more. So I'm actually not done with that bow. I'll come back to it later, but I wanted to work around it. That way I can kind of fill in around that section too, because you need to have sharp edges. So once I have the color and the fur down pat around it, then I can sharpen the edges a little bit better. And of course, like I always say, make sure your pencils are nice and sharp, especially for detailed areas. You don't have to have it sharp for the first few layers. That's not necessarily important. You can use the mineral spirit oil to create what it does is it kind of fixes not having to apply so many layers, and it eases up on your hands cramping up. That's one of my lifesavers, but you definitely want to make sure that you have a good paper that will be able to hold that oil. So I like using different kind of watercolor paper, especially the hot pressed version, because it's got more of a flatter texture instead of that that texture, the tooth of the paper being really texturized. But hot press, it looks more like a realistic, just more flat paper, but you could still see the tooth of the paper through this. It's just not nearly as enhanced. And that watercolor paper is going to be able to hold all of the oils and the waxes that are in the color pencils as well, as you start to build up those layers. So if you really want to know what kind of materials I'm using, I also have an ebook that you can purchase, and it has all of the materials that I like to use. That's on my website as well. If you just go to the ebook portion in the Learn to Draw section. There's definitely a lot of white fur going on too. So when it comes to white fur, it's actually a lot easier than drawing dark black fur, because there's not as many colors that you have to, there's not as much pigmentation happening. So you don't have to worry about applying so many layers. But my favorite colors to use in white fur are lighter, cold tone colors like blues, and then some raw umber colors, as well as a little bit of some just sepia colors. So a little bit of like a grayish brown color. Those really help to build a nice contrast of what's like happening underneath the white itself. And if you haven't noticed by now, I am not a very wordy person. I just kind of like tell it to you straight. And like a lot of these colors, they have all these fancy words and names and stuff. And I'll tell you exactly what colors they are, but I'm not rehearsed in them exactly. So I'm very basic when it comes to explaining everything. And I think a lot of my students really like that aspect of it, because it makes them feel like they're understood a little bit more, and that they can understand me at the same time. So, you know, having too many words to explain how to do a process, I think, can really confuse people. And then also having too many complex descriptions of how to do things can also be very intimidating. And I'm not here to intimidate people, because I know that my art itself can look very intimidating. I have a lot of my customers say, I could never draw like that. I can't even draw a stick figure. And I tell them all the time, well, you'd be surprised. You actually probably could draw this, because I've had a lot of people say that, and then they take my class and they were pleasantly surprised about the results. So it's a matter of just having patience and learning to enjoy the process itself, instead of focusing on the outcome and making it look perfect. I don't know if you've noticed, but I also work section by section. So I don't work in the bigger, like the whole portrait itself. I think in painting, it's a different thing. But when it comes to colored pencils, I focus more on each section. So do the eyes first, then the left side of the ear, then go to working on the right side, and then coming down to the neckline. And sometimes I'll go down to a little bit of the shoulders or the whole body. But I like to work left to right most of the time, because I try to prevent smudging since I'm right-handed. So that really is a good, efficient way to prevent any smudging from happening. And then at this point, I'm just really working on the final details of everything. So you can see I'm getting the shading down a little bit more. I'm using a black color pencil to do that. And then kind of blending that out with a brown color pencil. And I definitely, really at this point, the white I was just a little bit disappointed in, but I tried my best to fix it up as much as possible, because her fur she's got long fluffy fur, but it is also stiff in some areas. So I try to make it look more blended and smooth. But that is the result of it. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.